for Clouds. This is CLE on ethically embracing new technology. I always like to start out to give a little bit of background on myself. My name is Matt Spiegel. I am the founder and vice president of product for MyCase, web-based practice management software. I'm also an attorney. I started my own law firm back in 2009 after working at a big firm for about 4.5 years. And immediately after starting my firm, I saw the need for something. I started MyCase, and the rest is history. So I like to show this picture. I kind of turned in my suit for Nerf guns and a little bit more of an open, fun office environment. So, attorney and entrepreneur, that is me. So we're going to be talking a lot about the cloud, and we're really going to get into the ethics of the cloud and how best to use it. But I always like to start off with a little background on what the cloud is. Because believe it or not, this is a term that is so commonly used really in all society now, especially technology. But a lot of people still don't necessarily understand what the cloud actually is. And really, it's very, very simple, which I think is why this little background on the cloud is really valuable. It just breaks things down, and you can really understand that this is nothing to be afraid of, and this is nothing to be intimidated by. It's just a very easy concept. Quite basically, and this is very basic, the cloud is this and not this. So the cloud is downloading your information, accessing it from the web, versus installing the application or installing the data onto your computer using a CD drive or a thumb drive or whatever data device you're currently using. So this is a very simple depiction. What it's not is this. So this is the typical networking setup, the VPN networking systems that you used to see for the past 20 years. And if anybody has used Time Matters, I used Time Matters at my old firm that I had worked at. And I remember people wanting to log into Time Matters remotely, wanted to get in while they were at home. And this was the type of system that you would have to implement in order to do that. Just crazy proxy servers and VPN setups and clients and just all kinds of crazy things. You can look at this picture, and unless you have an advanced computer science degree, you probably have no idea what's really going on here. And you absolutely shouldn't. You are a lawyer, and worrying about this type of IT setup is something that you should never have to consider. And you should never have to worry about even hiring someone to do. This is complicated. This is extraordinarily expensive. And really, there are things of the past. So this is the really complicated system that we are traditionally all used to. And this is what it is now. The cloud is simple, straightforward, and integrated. Everything you need is just hosted up in the cloud, and it's just accessed by any system. So really what the cloud is, this is very basic, the cloud is just the internet, right? It's been given this term, the term cloud has sort of come about because of some of the different software offerings that has been that have been sort of propagated over the past 5-6 years. So it's nothing new. It's just the internet. It's just really the way that things are being delivered that has sort of coined this term cloud. Now the cool thing is that almost everybody's already using the cloud, and you may not even really realize it. What the cloud does is it moves everyday computing tasks off your local machine and allows you to access them through the internet. So, for example, I'm assuming everyone here uses Microsoft Word. Instead of Microsoft Word, you use Google Docs, right? Google Docs is essentially the cloud version of Microsoft Word. That little thing, that second thing down, the bottom left there, that's a hard drive, for those of you that don't recognize what that is. And instead of using a hard drive, you now use Dropbox, right, for all your documents or files, or Flickr for all your pictures. That's using the cloud. And that thing down at the bottom left, which a lot of you probably don't recognize, that's a DVD player, and that's how we used to use things. And now, instead of that, we use the cloud with iTunes and with Netflix. So these are really great examples of all things that you're probably using now, and you probably don't even realize it, but you're using the quote-unquote cloud. So Saas is a term that may be a little bit less omnipresent than the cloud. The cloud is used all the time. Saas is a little bit more of a specific term that may only be used within the industry. But Saas is software as a service. Really what this is where the cloud has really come from. This is really leveraging the internet to create and change an entire industry, the entire software industry. And this is where the term cloud really, when the term cloud started really becoming popular, is when Saas really took off. And all Saas is really a simple change in delivery method. If you look at a lot of the disruptions over the course of time, a lot of the industries that have been disrupted, it's been a simple change in delivery method that has caused that disruption. So, for example, with the Postal Service, right? Email completely disrupted the Postal Service. All it was a change in delivery method. It changed the way that message was delivered. It's delivered through the internet now instead of being delivered through a postman, through a letter. And that's what Saas is. It's just changing the way that software is delivered. Instead of getting a CD, the software lives on servers. Okay? It's just a change in delivery method. And instead of getting a monthly subscription, instead of making large purchases, Saas is traditionally a monthly subscription. So it's a much easier, much more flexible billing structure from a cost standpoint for the user. So really what Saas does is it leverages the cloud, the internet, to change an entire industry. And that's really what it's done. And now if you need some more proof that this is the trend, I ask you to probably take a look at your computer if you're using a laptop, or really any other laptop that's currently being sold. There's not even a CD drive included in the computer, right? I'm using a very expensive, state-of-the-art MacBook Pro, an Apple laptop. It's one of the most popular selling computers out there, and it doesn't even have the ability to put a CD into it. So that just tells you where things are going. People aren't using CDs anymore. People aren't installing software onto their computer. They're accessing that software from the internet, from the cloud. So why use the cloud? Well, really, there's several problems with the traditional methods of software delivery. There's a general mismatch of features and needs. Right? It's very hard to make updates to traditional software. When a new CT needs to be published and sent out to everybody, that's a big inconvenience, and you can't do that frequently. So typically when you have a lot of features, they have to pack it all into a development cycle, and then if they miss something, it's got to wait until the next release in order to make it in. Reliability issues. With traditional software, you're relying on your own hardware. You're relying on your computer. Anybody who has a Windows machine understands how problematic relying on your computer can be. The blue screen of death is all too frequent, and that's a reliability issue. Insufficient support is also a typical problem with traditional methods of software. There's just the business model is a lot different. Costs and margins are a lot different, and it just generally ends up that they have less support to provide to the customers. And this is something that really needs to be considered. And it's not very mobile. Up until recently, it wasn't mobile at all. But it's just that the technology behind it just renders it relatively immobile. So when we look at some of the benefits of cloud computing, before we really get into the ethics of it, there are several main benefits: mobility, security, business continuity, cost, and just overall better software. We're going to talk about each one a little bit individually. Mobility is an obvious one. The data can be accessed from anywhere. So it doesn't matter what device or operating system you have. That's completely irrelevant. You got a mobile phone, you got a Windows machine, it doesn't matter. You're just going to the internet. That's all you need is an internet connection. And because these companies are more startups and more tech-savvy companies, they mostly, almost always have mobile applications that go along with their web offering. And this obviously just provides you with a much better user experience. It's something that you can't ordinarily get from traditional methods of software. And there's also no complicated VPN or networking setup in order to be mobile. You simply just go to a website, and that's it. Security. This is a really big one, and we'll spend a little bit more time talking about this one, and then obviously we're going to dive into a lot of this stuff in more detail as we start to talk about the ethics. But security is perhaps the most important reason to move to the cloud. I will tell you that security in the cloud is far more secure than anything you could manage locally. Far more secure, both technically and physically. So you see the next point. I say the physical location of servers is far more secure. So you have your law firm, and some of you may have servers that you still maintain at your law firm. And my hope is that by the end of this discussion, you realize that you need to sell those servers and get rid of them. There's no reason to maintain that cost. But you have a front door to your office, I'm assuming, and that front door is, maybe it's made of really thick wood. You have a lot of locks on that front door. And then when you go in, there's probably another room that holds your server, and that room probably also has a wood door, and it probably doesn't have as many locks, or maybe it's not as secure as the front door, but there's another door. But that's really what stands between someone who wants your data, just a physical violation of your data. That's what stands between them and your server. Far more likely for someone to break into your law firm than for someone to break into our facilities that house our servers, which basically are surrounded by 4 feet of walls that are 4 feet of concrete. And there's only one door in, and it's like 4 feet of steel, and it's guarded by 2 armed guards. And there's a retina scan in order to get in. So what you're seeing is that everything is just far more secure if you're using the cloud, because they're professionals. They can dedicate. That's what their whole business is about, providing security for your servers. Whereas your business is about running a law firm. You are not a technical business. You should not be worrying about the security or the safety, physical safety of your servers. Data redundancy. This is a very big thing. The data in the cloud is backed up so much more frequently than you're going to be able to back it up yourself. And this data redundancy is key for so many different reasons. Security is obviously the biggest one. Most of these of the cloud vendors will actually back your data up in several different locations too, so that if something were to happen in one location, you wouldn't have any hiccup in your business. And we'll actually talk about that next when we talk about business continuity. And really, cloud vendors are experts in database security and server management. This is what they do. This is their entire job. They're not also lawyers. They're not also IT people. They are engineers that are specifically trained and educated and are extraordinarily good at the security of databases and servers. So it's better to just leave these things, leave the heavy lifting to the professionals. So looking at business continuity. Business continuity is the idea that no matter what happens, your business can keep running. So in the event of protection from national disasters, that's probably the best example. In the event that there's a hurricane or power goes out or California falls off the face of the country, the face of the earth, hopefully it doesn't happen. I'm out in San Diego, so I definitely don't want that to happen. But if it did, you would still be up and running, right? That's what business continuity is. And data redundancy, making your data extremely safe, that's a very big part of business continuity. Making sure that things are always backed up so that in the event that something happens to the actual servers, you could still go back and pull the data from 5 minutes ago or whatever time interval you keep. I need to ask the question, how often does your local server act up? My guess is that if you do maintain a local server, it acts up all of the time. I've given a lot of CLEs to some pretty large audiences, and the number of hands that go up is basically the same amount of hands that go up when I ask who has servers. So it's everybody. Everybody who has a server understands that they act up all the time. So, and again, obviously I'm a little bit biased, but I think that this is very, very true. You get generally just better software with the cloud. You get quicker software updates, right? These companies are able to develop and they're able to deploy features pretty much instantly. You don't have to wait for a CD to be delivered to you or for a new version to come out. You just wake up one morning and you've got new features to use. Better customer support. I think this is just a general cultural thing. There's much more of an emphasis on customer support in a lot of these web-based startups and web-based software companies. Support is just part of the culture, and there's a lot more resources available to dedicate towards support. And the features are developed to meet the user's needs. They're more agile. Like I said, they're able to do things a lot quicker, so they're able to really listen to their customers and develop things that are specifically asked for by the customer base. This is very important because that ends up just providing a better software, a better experience for the user. And cost is a really, really important one. There's just a significant reduction in infrastructure costs alone with the cloud. So you don't need that server that cost you $10,000 to purchase and another $5,000 a year in hardware to maintain. You don't need IT staff. This is a huge one. IT staff is probably one of the biggest expenses that comes along with maintaining a server or maintaining these complicated systems. And with the cloud, you just don't need it. You also get very, very cheap storage. These servers that are maintained by cloud vendors, storage is basically a non-line item. It's not even viewed as being as a cost at all. You can offer unlimited storage, essentially, or at least extraordinarily cheap. And at the end of the day, all this equals more available time. When you're reducing all these things, when you're reducing all these costs, and you're removing barriers, and you're being able to access things wherever you are, it just provides you with more billable time. I actually don't like to say more billable time. I actually like to say just more time for you to enjoy, right? If you were to save 8 hours by using the cloud, if you were to save 8 hours a week, I would encourage you to actually use those 8 hours to take a day off and just enjoy life rather than spending it just billing more time. That's totally unnecessary and not something that we need more of. We need to enjoy our lives a little bit more. As lawyers, we've got a high rate of suicide, and a little bit of time just spent enjoying life could go a long way to reducing that. So when you implement technology and you start saving a whole bunch of time, just use it wisely. Don't necessarily always use it to just bill more time. That's my one piece of anecdotal advice to the legal industry today. So we're going to switch gears, and now we're going to really get into the ethics of using the cloud. And this is a very broad subject. I have some things that I do to really break it down for you so that you can have it a little bit more manageable. And I think that I give you questions to ask. I give you some really good questions to ask that if you do ask, you are doing what you need to do to be ethical. One of the most important things here that I always like to start off my ethics discussion with is do not listen to the fear mongers. One of my favorite quotes is that fear is easily spread amongst the ignorant. And this really is very true, and it's especially true today. There are so many people out there, IT people, people at honestly, there are people at state bar organizations that feel this way. But people who just are scared of the cloud, or they have agendas, right? The IT world, the cloud is harmful to them. It's easy. You do it yourself. You don't need an IT person to set anything up. So there's reasons for them to want to spread fear. And I say all you need to do is get informed and do a little bit and do your homework, and you will be fine. Do not listen to the fear mongers when it comes to the cloud. You can listen to these things about the NSA, and you can listen to these, all the hacking stories that you hear. And yes, that happens. But when you ask the questions that I'm going to give you, and you get the appropriate answers to those questions, you have more than a reasonable likelihood that your information is very safe. And what I will tell you is that when you get the answers to these questions in the right way, your data is infinitely more secure than if it were to be on your computer or on your own server. And that's the very important thing to note. That it's far more likely for you to have data on your computer and your laptop gets stolen than for someone to break into servers at a cloud provider, at a software company's data center. It's just far more likely. So it's something that should be really considered. And when you do think about it, I think it tends to make a lot of sense. Bottom line is that the cloud is safe, and it's important to recognize that. It's a perfectly safe place to put confidential data, but you do want to just have some questions that you ask and some concerns when you are putting that really confidential data up there. It's different than, let's say, for example, Apple's latest breach, the iCloud nude photo breach. If you were to ask Apple the questions that we're going to go over, you probably would not get the appropriate answers, at least when it comes to iCloud. And so if you were, maybe that's okay for just pictures of your family, but something that's a little bit more private, like nude photos, maybe it's not as appropriate for. And the same kind of goes for, for legal information, legal documents or representation. Maybe there are some things that it's okay. You can put them up there and the name, client's name. Obviously that is something you want to protect, but just in general, it just may not be something that that you absolutely need to worry about the state-of-the-art security. But a social security number is obviously something that you would, right? So just giving you kind of that example. So as I mentioned to you, I really break it down into questions to ask. And there are 4 questions to ask. It's important to note here that bar associations have ruled on or made written opinions on the cloud. And last I checked, there was something maybe 20 or a little over 20, maybe more than that, bars that have actually written opinions and made rulings on using the cloud for confidential client information. And there's actually a resource on the ABA's website. There's a resource that shows you all the different opinions from all the different state bars. What I can tell you is that every single one of them says that it's okay to use the cloud, and every one of them uses the same standard when it comes to ethical considerations and maintaining privacy, and that's a reasonableness standard. It's the default. It's a default lawyer standard. It's the default bar association standard. You can call it a cop-out, call it what you will, but they say reasonable. So what I'm here to tell you is that I'm going to give you what is reasonable. I'm going to give you the 4 questions to ask, and if you ask these questions and you get the answers that I'm going to tell you need to get, you will have met your reasonable standard. There will not be anybody out there that could say that you are unreasonable in using the cloud to maintain important client confidentiality and data. So those 4 questions, we will obviously get into each of them in more detail. Number 1, where is my data being stored? 2, who has access to my data? 3, how do I get my data out? And 4, how is the data encrypted? These are the questions. These are the reasonable questions. They're pretty easy, and this is all you really need to do. Now, the more detailed aspect of it, though, is what the answers to these questions actually look like. And I'm going to give you very specific things that you can jot down notes about, and you will be armed with exactly what you need to get from these cloud vendors. So you're actually going to be asking the cloud vendors these questions. So if you were to call MyCase, or if you were to call Clio, or Rocket Matter, or any one of the providers out there, it would be totally okay for you to just get someone on the phone and ask these questions. And believe me, they better be willing to answer these questions. And if they're not willing to answer these questions, then that's a red flag. Now, it may be that the person you talk to just doesn't know the answers to these questions, and that's okay. Don't expect everybody, everyone in customer service or, whatever department you're talking to actually know the answers to these questions. Most people will, but don't hold that against them. If they don't know the answers, just ask to talk to someone who does know the answer, or ask them to get back to you with the answers. It's the red flag is when they just say, "No, we don't want to answer these questions," or if they answer them in a different way that I'm going to tell you they should be answering them. So the first question, where is my data being stored? And where are the servers located? Right? That is really the main question here. Now, if you remember, we talked a little bit about this when we talked about security. But when we were talking about security, we were talking about the physical barriers to get into the servers, right? The structure, the 4 feet of concrete and the steel and all that good stuff. But the heart of this question is actually about ethics and your ability to maintain confidentiality for your clients. It's not necessarily about the physical barriers for someone getting into your servers. That's one aspect of this, and it's important. But the key here is that your servers are located in the United States. That is the point here that I'm trying to make with this question, and that is what you need to hear from your cloud provider. Now, if you're not in the United States, if you're in Canada, if you're in Europe, or wherever you might be, then obviously you have a different answer to that question. The servers need to be in your country. And I don't know all the laws for other countries. I'm not claiming to. But here, if you're in the States, you need to make sure that those servers are also in the United States. And the reason for that is an ethical one, because let's just say you have servers that are in India, and you are sharing a very important document, or you're storing a very important document on the system, and it's on a server in India. Well, now that document is technically stored in India, which now submits that document to the jurisdiction of another country. And so I don't really think I need to describe the problems that could impose, but I definitely don't want to know that my confidential documents are controlled by some other country's laws, and whatever they feel like doing with them, they would essentially have the right to do. So it's very important. The answer to this question has to be that the servers are kept in the United States. Okay, our second question. Who has access to my data? So this is really important, and a lot of people, I think, they think about this question. It's common enough to be a reasonable question to ask when you're starting to look at cloud software. But it's not necessarily what you would expect the answer, what you're looking for is not necessarily what you would expect the answer to be. First of all, this is typically something that is found in the terms of service or the privacy policy. Okay, so you're actually going to maybe need to do a little bit of reading in order to actually find out this information. It's one of those things where everyone, how many of us just click on the I agree button. Well, essentially this is going to be kept in the documentation that accompanies that I agree button. So it may be a good idea to read through, or at least open up that document and do a search, a Control-F type search to find the word access in that document or something like that. You can also call in and you can obviously get this question answered by someone who works at the company. But what you're looking for is that, believe it or not, it doesn't really matter how big the company is, there should really only be one or two key employees that have actual access to the data. Okay? That's usually a CTO, a Chief Technical Officer, someone on the technical side. CEOs usually almost always do not have access to any of this data, and they shouldn't unless they're also on the technical side. It's really just a CTO and then someone who really maybe runs operations, runs the servers, runs the database, someone who needs to actually get into that encrypted data. And very, very important to note here with this particular question that nobody on the server side should have access to the data. What I mean by that is, so most cloud vendors, it's not like they have their own servers in some data center somewhere. They're using these massive cloud providers, these massive server providers. Amazon, IBM now has one, Microsoft has one, Rackspace. There's a ton of different people out there. Everyone's building data centers. They're allowing people to use their servers. So basically, the vendor will have a contract with that cloud provider or with the servers provider to have servers at their locations to use their server space. Very important that no one on that server side, so Amazon, in our case it's Amazon, no one at Amazon should have any access to that data, to that server. Now, we're going to talk about encryption here in a minute, but all the data should be encrypted, and the key that's used to decrypt that message should also not be contained on these servers that are with a third party. But even if someone got into the data, even if someone on the server side got into the server, they still wouldn't have the key to actually unlock the data, so they wouldn't be able to see anything. Okay, really important. Now, these two key employees that you're looking for, they should also be under some sort of confidentiality agreement and contractual obligation with the company itself, right? So a CTO is going to have a signed document with the company that they work for that says that they're bound by, they're not allowed to do anything with this data. They have a confidentiality agreement, and just that they're contractually obligated to keep this data safe and not access it for any unnecessary purpose. It's a really important question here. Okay, so how do I get my data out? Now, this question is asked all the time. We get it all the time. It's a pretty common question to get. But again, I think some of the nuances of the answer that you're looking for are not necessarily as apparent, but they're definitely important. So the easy answer to this question is easily. Your data should be able to come out very easily. And the other key here is that you need to be able to get your data out in a non-proprietary format. Okay? What that means is that's like CSV. That stands for comma separated values. How many of you guys have used QuickBooks, right? And you go into your bank and you try to get your data into QuickBooks format. Well, it's totally proprietary. It does you no good for anything other than QuickBooks. It's like QBO or IIFX or whatever it is. It's just a whole lot of data that's totally unusable unless you have a program. You want to get your data out in a non-proprietary format that allows you to move that data anywhere. Right? You want to be flexible with the data. You want to have access to it. If you're leaving QuickBooks and you export it into QuickBooks format, it's worthless to you unless you go and use another QuickBooks product. Right? You don't want that. You want to be able to get it out in a non-proprietary format. CSV is the most common. And then I also tell you that getting your data out, exporting your data, it should be as easy as a single click. That's really it. A single click is all it should take to get all of your data out, and you will find that most providers will give that feature to you. How is my data encrypted? So this is perhaps, all these questions are really important, but this one is maybe the most important. This is what you want. You want end-to-end bank-grade encryption. Okay? So end-to-end bank-grade encryption. That means the same encryption that your bank would use when you're sending money or when you're looking at your balance, when you're doing anything with your money, which obviously is, we got to be super secure with that. That's the same level of encryption that you want with your client's data. It's reasonable to get this. This is not crazy. This is pretty basic encryption mechanism. They're also state-of-the-art. So here's what you're looking for. You're looking for 128-bit SSL encryption on transfer to and from the server. So when you guys go to a website, I don't know how many of you have noticed, when you're looking at the HTTP in the website, the ones that have HTTPS, and it's like lit up in green, or sometimes it has a little shield or something by it. That means the website is using 128-bit SSL transfer. What that means is the data is encrypted from the website as it is sent to the server, and when it leaves the server and comes back, it's also encrypted. 128-bit SSL encryption. That's the gold standard for sending traffic on the web. And if you get to a site, in fact, a lot of the browsers now, you probably have experienced it. If you go to a website that's not SSL, it gives you a little warning and says this website is not trusted, or this could be data might not be secure. Obviously, you don't want to see something like that when you're talking about putting and storing your confidential information, your client's confidential information. So that's what you want to look for. And then what you want on storage is 256-bit AES encryption. This is the gold standard in encryption. Is basically unbreakable, and this is how you want your data to be stored. So the data that is actually stored encrypted, this is the encryption standard you want, 256-bit AES. There are a couple others that are as good, but this is the most common. And this you're going to have to ask, right? The 128-bit SSL you can see for yourself if you see that little HTTPS in the web address, or you see the little green, the green highlights or the green shield. That gives you that sort of peace of mind. But with the 256-bit, you're going to need to call the company and just ask what kind of encryption they use. You also could look at companies' security white papers. Right, white papers are those like PDF documents that companies will have to share with you or available on their website somewhere. A lot of companies will have a security white paper that will give you a breakdown of all the security precautions that they take. That is a really, really, really good document to look over. A lot of times, all these questions will be answered in that security white paper. We have a security white paper that pretty much answers all these questions. So it's a good thing to look for, and it will give you a lot of good information, and this is what you want to see. So again, 128-bit SSL on transfer to and from the server, and 256-bit AES encryption on the storage of that information. So those are our 4 questions. Pretty straightforward. You ask those questions, there's not going to be a single bar. Well, you ask those 4 questions and get the answers that I told you need to get. There's not going to be anybody out there who's going to claim that you are unreasonable with how you went to keep their data confidential. But there are some other things here that I think are really important that we really need to talk about. Email is one of those things that has very, very large ethical implications. So email should not be used for communication that is confidential in nature. This may come as a shock to a lot of you. It may not come as a shock. But email is not secure. Along the same lines as what I was talking about before with the physical location of servers, when you send an email through Gmail, let's say, it's going through God only knows how many servers and God only knows how many different countries. And that's scary. If you don't understand why this is scary, just turn on any news channel. You see all the hacks, all the email hacks and break-ins and stuff like that. I equate email. This is one of my favorite analogies. Emails are as confidential and secure as a postcard written in pencil. What this means is when you send that postcard, you send this postcard to a friend or whatever, let's say it's written in pencil, along the way, that postcard exchanges a lot of hands. Any of those hands can take an eraser, erase one word, and change it to a different word. That's what email is like, right? When you send an email through Gmail, it can pass through a lot of different hands. Anyone who wants to mess with it or read it can. Now, it's probably never happened to anybody. At least no one here. It's happened to a lot of people, but there are so many emails sent that the odds of it having happened to you are pretty small. But that doesn't mean that it can't. It absolutely can. All it's going to take is one time, one really important email gets messed with, and it ruins your case, or it puts you in the crosshairs of a malpractice suit. You don't want that. Don't use email when you're talking to clients about confidential information. There are plenty of other alternatives. Now, you can encrypt email. There are some solutions that allow you to encrypt email. Gmail's working on it right now. They're pretty clunky so far. I would give it another couple years before they're really dialed in. There are plenty of other tools. There are messaging systems. There are practice management systems that have messaging features built in. You can just use other things to communicate that the messages are kept completely secure. Right? They're only running through the company's servers, and they're encrypted along the way. So just pay attention to email. Okay, a few more really important things. Check into the business, right? Does it have long-term viability? You're going to be investing a lot of time and a lot of money into not a lot of money because they're actually a lot more affordable, but you're going to be investing a lot of time in the cloud software that you use. It's important to make sure that they're going to be around. And there are two things here to kind of look for, right? Because a lot of times you're talking about startups. You want to see one of two kind of paths. Are they very well funded? Do they have very big VC backing? Or have they been acquired by a much more stable, successful company? So in my case, which is the company MyCase, we were acquired by a much bigger, stable, successful software company. That means we're not going anywhere. A company like Clio, they've raised a significant amount of venture capital money. So that makes them pretty stable. So there are two different paths, but you do want to see that, right? I would be concerned about that company that's just a startup and they haven't necessarily raised any money yet, and they haven't been acquired by anybody. Not to say that you shouldn't use them, because a lot of those companies could be really amazing, and some of the coolest things are happening at companies just like that. But you just need to understand that there's the risk that company won't be around in 6 months or a year. That's just a reality. EULA is actually important. Now, EULA stands for End User License Agreement. That's the terms of service, the privacy policy, the things that you have to click through to say that you agree. Don't just click agree. Read the small print. It's a good thing. I mean, we're lawyers. We should be thinking about these things. But at the very least, like I said, open up the document, do a Control F, F as in Frank, a search through the document for keywords that at least are things that you want to know what the policies are, such as like access to information or location of servers, things like that. It's a good idea to look at these things. Ethically, you want to know how the company would handle a subpoena. Okay, this is a big deal. Now, the answer you're going to get, and that you kind of want to hear, is that they're going to evaluate each subpoena independently, and they're going to, respond accordingly. They're going to follow the law. There's no real blanket policy for subpoenas. I think the important thing is that they notify you of a subpoena, right? Unless they're strictly prohibited from notifying you by law, right? There are some subpoenas typically that will come from the federal government that will have a no notice requirement on there. And in that case, obviously, you want your vendor to have a policy of fighting that. But obviously, they're going to have to, abide by the law. But on any other subpoenas, they should be notifying you. So that's something to look for. So when you're moving to the cloud, I think this is important just to kind of note some kind of best practices for moving your practice to the cloud. Don't just jump in head first, right? Keep your old system around for a little while because that's really important. You don't want to just move all of your data in there. You've got a lot of ethical questions to ask first, and then you've got a lot of investing and learning the software. If you just dump all of your stuff in there to begin with, you're going to have a very bloated system that's not going to be very easy to use, and it's going to be very just bloated. So don't migrate everything, right? There are certain things that you just don't need to worry about, like time and billing software, or time and billing, time entries and invoices. You don't need all that, right? Just back it up and keep it out there for reference, but you don't need to bring it into a new system and just have it clog it up and take up space. That's just unnecessary. Utilize the trial offers. Try as many as you can before making a decision. The cool thing about a lot of these software providers is there's a ton of flexibility, and there's free trials all over the place. So you can very easily just sign up for the software and be playing with it in a matter of minutes. And it doesn't cost you anything other than a few minutes of your time. And you can really get a feel for which one you like best, because there are a lot out. So to kind of sum everything up for you, the cloud is everywhere, and you probably use it every day. And the cloud is not going anywhere. We are just going to get more and more reliant on the cloud, and we will do less and less with systems that are installed on our computer. It will happen almost never. The cloud can significantly change your life and affect your bottom line, and it can be used perfectly ethically. All you need are just a few questions. You need to be armed with a few questions. You need to get the answers that I've told you would be important to get, and you will have used the cloud perfectly ethically. And when you do that, you start to see all the benefits of the cloud, and you're not worrying about, there's no fear, you're not worrying about your data being at risk. It can be a really beautiful thing, and it can significantly change our practice. That concludes our CLE. I thank you very much.